To me, Global Reach Out is inspiring.
Is connecting with God, reaching out to the world, and impacting life.
The stories that are shared is so personal and it deeply impacted me.
Global Reach Out to me is reach out to the truth.
Connecting hearts, connecting lives. You're listening to Global Reach Out.
Hello friends, a very warm welcome from Global Reach Out.
Hi everyone. Today we are continuing on the internal issues that Nehemiah faced in his leadership. And this is how it looked like. The rich were taking advantage of the poor. Previously, outsiders like Sanballat and a company of hooligans created problems. Now the problem has come from within, which, well, I guess is always harder to solve, isn't it? Earlier on, the first internal crisis had to do with too much to do, but too little people to help. In other words, there was a lack of human resources. Nehemiah solved the problem by adding reinforcement. The second crisis was more serious and related to the family. People and their wives, the poor in the majority, versus their brethren, the rich minority. There was a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish kin. Well, this is what it says in the book of Nehemiah. For there were those who said, with our sons and daughters we are many. We must get grain so that we may eat and stay alive. There were also those who said, we are having to pledge our fields, our vineyards, and our houses in order to get grain during the famine. And there were those who said, we are having to borrow money on our fields and vineyards to pay the king's tax. Now our flesh is the same as that of our kindred. Our children are the same as their children, and yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters have been ravished. We are powerless, and our fields and our vineyards now belong to others. What were the problems? Well, there was a population explosion. The agricultural land was not tended because of the rebuilding of the walls. Taxation imposed on the impoverished population and the rich taking advantage of the poor. The question is, who were these rich people? They could have been Jews who had become wealthy during the exile period and brought their wealth with them to Jerusalem. Or the descendants of Jews who had arrived almost a century earlier during the first return with Zerubbabel and had established lucrative business. Now, these rich people lent large sums of money and charged high interest at 12%, which was contrary to the Mosaic law. When the borrowers defaulted in their repayment, their fields were seized. They were forced to mortgage their property and, listen, sell their children into slavery. Can you imagine that? Their own people doing that to their own people. And of course, as a leader, as a good leader, Nehemiah was angry. Nehemiah was angry with the rich for taking advantage of the poor who were their own people. And guess what? God is always concerned about the poor. Read in almost all the books of the Bible. Fairness to the poor and oppressed are central in Bible teaching. So, knowing the heart of God, this is how Nehemiah responded. He said, I was very angry when I heard their outcry and these complaints. So after thinking it over, I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are all taking interest from your own people. And I called a great assembly to deal with them. After thinking it over, I brought charges against the nobles and officials. I said to them, you are all taking interest from your own people. As far as we were able, we have brought back our own Jewish kindred who had been sold to other nations. But now you are selling your own kin, who must then be brought back by us, bought back by us. When they heard that, they were silent and could not find a word to say. So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations of our enemies? Moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Let us, Nehemiah said, let us stop taking of interest. Now from this we find and we see that first Nehemiah was angry and rebuked the nobles and officials because of what they were doing was wrong. Because they were doing wrong against their own people. Second, he told them that by doing what they were doing, they brought disrepute to God's name. And third, there was no fear of God in those people. And finally, he urged them to follow his example by not taking any interest. Now, underlying all these is the injunction from the Mosaic laws that prohibits usury. Now, usury is the practice of charging excessive interest. And this is a reference that is found from the book of Leviticus in the Bible. It says like this: if any of your kin fall into difficulty and become dependent on you, you shall support them. They shall live with you as though resident aliens. Do not take interest in advance or otherwise make a profit from them. But fear your God. Let them live with you. You shall not lend them your money at interest taken in advance, or provide them food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. If any who are dependent on you become so impoverished that they sell themselves to you, you shall not make them serve as slaves. They shall remain with you as hired or bound laborers. They shall serve with you until the year of the Jubilee. Then they and their children with them shall be free from your authority. They shall go back to their own family and return to their ancestral property. For they are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves are sold. What a clear injunction by God. So, Nehemiah instructed them, saying this: you must restore their fields, you must restore their vineyards, their olive groves and homes to them this very day, and repay the interest you charge when you lend them money, grain, new wine, and olive oil. And guess what? Guess what and how the people responded. Here is how The people responded, "We will restore everything and demand nothing from them. We will do as you say so." And this is what Nehemiah did. It records for us in the book of Nehemiah. "And I called the priest and made them take an oath to do as they had promised. I also shook out the fold of my garment and said, 'So may God shake out everyone from the house and from property who does not perform this promise. Thus may they be shaken out and emptied.' And all the assembly said, 'Amen,' and praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised." Well, that's a great picture of what and how an effective leader make the people do, make things happen. It was done verbally, oath-taking, and as well non-verbally, shaking of garments. Nehemiah took their words seriously. So, from this, here are some of Nehemiah as a role model of leadership. Let me mention to you. First, what he refused to do. He refused to accept any salary during his 12 years as governor of Judah. Second, what he did. He and his brothers and servants are lending the poorer people money and grain, listen, with no interest charged. And he regularly fed about 150 Jewish officials at his own expense. And so, they responded positively to his effective leadership. Why? I believe Nehemiah practiced 4 important leadership principles. Here they are. First, doing the right thing and things rightly. Doing the right things and doing things rightly. Now, we all know, right? Words are cheap. Action was needed, and he did something about it. He dealt with the problem by rebuking the rich for their usury and failing to observe the Mosaic law. He pointed out the wrong as it was. He told them to stop doing it and return to the rightful owners, the lands, the fields, the vineyard, the olive yards, and houses seized in default of payment. Second, leading by example. A leader has no right to ask others to do what he or she is unwilling to do. Isn't that right? Hence, he was able to exert influence on them because of the example set by him. 3, practicing courageous leadership. A courageous leader must respond when a crisis arises and bring the people back to the word and deliver a rebuke rather than close an eye or sweep everything under the carpet as if nothing has happened. Finally, fearing God and the glory of God's name were his theological motivation for doing what he did. Nehemiah told them not to do what they did on these 2 bases. First, fear of God. People need to be reminded of this biblical truth. When we fear God, think about this. When we fear God, we will not dare to take advantages of others nor things to hurt others. Second, to prevent the don'ts of the nation and our enemies with regard to God's image. As God's people, we need to be different from the rest of the nations. That is one way of honoring God. Sometimes leaders are accused, and rightly so, because of what we call this NATO leadership, NATO, which stands for No Action, Talk Only Leadership. It is easy to talk about problems, right? Anyone can talk about problems. But to do something about it, to do something about the problem, is easier said than done. And in this case, Nehemiah pointed out the wrong action of the people and did something about the situation by setting an example. Now, that is a leader. Have you heard of the saying that goes something like this? Just when you thought it's over, it was the beginning of another problem. That's right. Because that's what Nehemiah experienced again. Just when Nehemiah solved the internal problems and thought that the external no longer posed a threat, he was in for another surprise. His enemies refused to give up their quest to stop the rebuilding project. Do you know why? Well, because now they hatched a more sinister and subtle plot. When we are back for session 7, I will share with you and learn together. So, make sure to stay tuned. Goodbye for now, and see you.
And that's this week's episode of the Effective Leadership Program, brought to you by Global Reach Out. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.